Hi, I'm Aviva Rotenberg, Director of Professional Development and Strategic Initiatives at the Canadian Bar Association, also known as the CBA. I'm also a Canadian lawyer, and I've been here at the CBA for the past 12 years, and I'm happy to share some of my experience with you today. This talk is going to address three main areas. First, we'll talk about the difference between a law society and a bar association. Then we'll talk about the requirements for lawyers in Canada to meet certain professional development hours. And third, we'll talk about some of the ways that lawyers do that. So to begin, the difference between the Law Society and the Bar Association. The first thing to know is that in Canada, these organizations are completely separate. That is not the case in most parts of the United States, which can lead to some confusion. In Canada, the Bar Association and the Law Society are not in any way connected, but some of the objectives that both organizations look at do overlap, and that can also lead to some confusion. So we'll talk first about the role of the Law Society. The Law Society is the regulating body, and it's responsible for governing the legal profession in the public interest. So it does this by ensuring that lawyers are both ethical and competent. The Law Society also has the power to discipline lawyers that are not meeting those standards. It also sets standards for admission into the practice. So they are the body that takes someone from being a law student to being a lawyer. Anyone who wants to be called a lawyer in Canada needs to register with the Law Society. They need to pay fees, they need to complete the appropriate paperwork, and they need to meet their professional development hours, which is something that we were going to talk a little bit more about today. The CBA, on the other hand, is a voluntary association. So for the most part, membership is completely optional. We do have one province in Canada that requires membership in the CBA for all lawyers, but that is not the case across the country. The CBA's role is really to be an advocate in protecting the independence of the bar and the judiciary. The CBA also plays an important role in supporting lawyers to be ethical and competent. So the Law Society has a requirement that lawyers be ethical and competent, and the Canadian Bar Association helps support lawyers in doing so. One of the ways that we accomplish that is through the CBA's professional development program, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that now. The CBA is a national body with branches in every province and territory, and professional development training is delivered both nationally through the office where I work in Ottawa and also locally through our branch offices. So let's talk about what the professional development requirements are in Canada. Prior to 2009, there were no mandatory requirements for lawyers to undergo professional development training in Canada. And that's unusual because law was one of the only regulated professions that did not have a standard like that. So engineers, nurses, doctors, accountants, all of those professions had a required amount of hours, but lawyers didn't. In 2009, mandatory requirements were introduced through the law societies in the provinces, and that was not done uniformly. So it started in one province, and then other provinces introduced their mandatory requirements as the time went on. And at the beginning, the requirements were not the same across the country, but over time they have harmonized what the requirements are, and for the most part, every province and territory has basically the same requirements. There is one exception to that. There is one province that has no requirement for mandatory hours, but they do have a requirement to file an educational plan outlining what the lawyer's intentions are with respect to professional development. Leaving that case aside, most provinces require 12 to 15 hours of training a year. And of that, many places also stipulate that lawyers need to undergo 3 hours of ethics, professionalism, or practice management content in their training. So we refer to that as EPPM, ethics, professionalism, and practice management. Lawyers are required to file a report each year. As I mentioned, there's paperwork that needs to be filed to maintain your status as a lawyer with the Law Society. And one of the things that they need to answer on that report is how many hours of training they've undertaken and whether they've completed the EPPM requirement. If they fail to do so, the Law Society can impose sanctions. I have heard of fines being imposed, and there may well be other options available to Law Society for repeat offenders. Despite the fact that most jurisdictions have adopted a mandatory professional development requirement, there is no compelling research that I am aware of that indicates that a mandatory requirement increases competence or reduces liability claims. So let's just explain what that means. there absolutely is a link that shows that lawyers that keep learning and keep training are better lawyers. But making that requirement mandatory does not increase their competence. So despite that knowledge and that understanding, it's still something that is required across Canada and in most places in the United States. So what counts for 12 to 15 hours of PD in Canada? The overall hourly requirement refers to really a broad range of programming that might be available. So that could be a conference on tax law, it could be a teleconference with educational training for a family law lawyer. There's really many options that are available. There's no test or other proof of learning that's required, but some jurisdictions do require proof of attendance in the program. So a law society may choose to audit a lawyer, which means that they are challenging them to provide evidence of their participation in a program. And a way that the CBA assists lawyers with that is by maintaining pretty accurate records of who registers in every program, so that if someone needs to come back to us and get a piece of that proof, we have that available for them. Other activities that can be accredited include convening a study group, some types of writing, and also teaching. So if someone is teaching a professional development training, they can be accredited for up to 3 hours of professional development towards their professional development requirement for every hour of the program. So that includes what is expected of them in terms of preparation for that topic. Anyone can actually be a teacher of PD in Canada. There is no accreditation that's required for professional development training, although of course to teach in a law school, that's a different story. So what kind of programs qualify for ethics, professionalism, and practice management content? This is the area that varies the most across the country. So for the most part, programs related to legal ethics will qualify. It's a little more complicated with topics that are related to professionalism and practice management. Topics that relate to technology, risk management, time management, and client service will typically be accredited for EPPM content. Topics that tend to be a little bit harder to confirm as EPPM content can relate to topics like lawyers' wellness, diversity within a law firm. Those are topics that some law societies agree as EPPM content and other law societies do not. Topics that relate to things like finding more clients, making more money, marketing and advertising, those kinds of topics will almost never be accredited for any kind of professional development hours in Canada. So how do lawyers actually get these hours? What are the options that are available to them? So I'll speak to what we offer here through the Canadian Bar Association. The training that's offered through the CBA falls into two main categories. There's in-person training and there's online training. The in-person training, it can vary from multi-day conferences to breakfast seminars to keynote addresses. Any kind of seminar activity where there is training or advanced education happening for lawyers is something that the CBA may consider as part of its professional development offering. Most of the national events are conferences. They're held at hotels and with audiences anywhere from 60 people right up to 500 people. And most of that content will be accredited for both regular hours and for EPPM content. Most of the conferences relate to substantive areas of law, so they may be family law, again, tax law, bankruptcy law, immigration. But two of our really popular conferences are actually our ethics, our legal ethics conference, and a conference for female lawyers called Leadership for Women Lawyers. So that's a program that's related to skill development for female lawyers, and both of those are also accredited conferences. On the online side, as technology has become more and more prevalent, we have taken on other kinds of training. So one of our most popular programs that we offer is through our online webinar platform. We deliver a lot of practice management training that way. We also deliver substantive legal training through our online platform. But we find that many lawyers look to the CBA to find that EPPM content, and the webinar delivery system is a great way to deliver that. Our offerings are usually 1.5 hours, and we tend to package our programs in 8 program series. So anyone that registers for 8 programs will get 12 hours of accredited content, which is, of course, what they need for the year. So we try and make it easy for our members to find those hours, and that usually includes the EPPM content. One of the great advantages to delivering training online is Canada is a very large country, and to bring speakers together in one room, it represents a lot of time and a lot of expense for the speakers and for the provider of the education. Using a webinar platform, our speakers can be located anywhere across the country, and so can our participants. So we often have programs with one speaker on one side of the country, another speaker on the other side of the country, and an audience from all over, including international participation. So it's really increased access to education by providing really affordable training in a way that's very easy to access and doesn't require a huge time commitment. Technology can also be used to deliver other kinds of professional development, whether it's by teleconference, online training manuals, interactive quizzes and polling. There are so many options that are available. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity to address you today. I hope this information's been helpful to you and wish you the best of luck in your own planning.